There's another choice that we have in life. That's a life's companion. A young man or a young woman stepping out on life has been given a right to make a choice. The young man chooses, the young woman has a right to accept or reject it. But it's still a choice on both sides. Both man and woman. They have a right to choice. Now, it's a serious thing when we go to choose a wife. A man, for the vow here, is until death do we part. That's how we should keep it. And you take that vow before God, that only death will separate you. And I think we should, a man in his right mind, that's planning a future, that he should choose that wife very careful. Be careful what you're doing. And the woman choosing a husband or accepting the choice of a husband should be real careful what she's doing. And especially in these days, a man should think and pray before he chooses a wife. I think today what's got so many divorce cases now that we lead the world in America in divorce cases. We lead the rest of the world. There's more divorces here than anywhere else. This nation. And supposed to be and thought of a Christian nation. What a reproach. Our divorce courts. I think the reason of it is because that man has got away from God. And women's got away from God. And we find that if a man prayed and a woman prayed over the matter, not just look at a pretty set of eyes or big strong shoulders or such as that, or some other worldly affection, but would look first to God and say, God, is this your plan? I think today there's so much cheating. Just like in school, when the kids come by of a morning, many of the kids in the neighborhood, friends of mine, will come by and say, Brother Branham, will you pray for us? We're having a test today. I worked all night and I don't seem that I can get it settled. Pray for me. I think that any school kid, and the parents at the table of a morning, if you'd say, Mother, John's got a test today, let's pray for him now. I think it'd be all that you could ever do in any other way, or looking over on somebody else's paper and cheating. I think if you just come out and pray over the matter, and if we would study what we're doing when we're going to get married, when we choose our wife or husband, if we'd study it over, a man should pray earnestly, for he could ruin his entire life. Remember, the vow is until death do we part. And he could ruin his life by making the wrong choice. But if he knows he's making the wrong choice, and is marrying a woman that isn't fit to be his wife, and he does it anyhow, then it's his fault. If the woman takes the husband and knows that he's not fit to be a husband to you, then that's your own fault. After you know what's right and wrong. So you shouldn't do it until you thoroughly pray through. Again, the kind of woman that a man would choose will reflect his ambitions and his character. If a man chooses the wrong woman, it reflects his character. And what he ties himself to shows truly what's in him. A woman reflects what's in the man when he chooses her for wife. It shows what's down in him. No matter what he says outside, watch what he married. I go to a man's office and he says he's a Christian. Pin-ups all around on the walls. That old bloogly-woogly music going on. I don't care what he says. I don't believe his testimony. Because his spirit's feeding on them things of the world. What say if he would marry a coarse girl? Or what if he'd marry a sex queen? or just a pretty modern ricketta. It reflects, it shows what he has in his mind of what his future home's going to be. Because he's took her to raise his children by, and whatever she is, that's the way she'll raise those children. So it reflects what's in the man. A man that takes a woman like that shows just what he's thinking of the future. Could you imagine a Christian doing a thing like that? No, sir, I could not. A true Christian will not look for such beauty queens and coarse girls and sex queens. He'll look for Christian character. Now, you can't have all things. There might be one girl that's real pretty, and the other girl, maybe her statue looks better than this one. And you might have to sacrifice one for the other. But if she's not the statute of a lady, of a woman, and I don't care whether she's pretty or not, you better look at her character. Whether she's pretty or not pretty. Now, for it is becoming, if a Christian would choose a wife, he ought to choose a genuine, born-again woman. Regardless of what she looks like, it's what she is, what makes her. And then again, that reflects his own godly character, and reflects what's in his mind and what's going to be in the future for his family. Will be raised by such a woman. For the future plans for his home. If he marries one of these little modern rickettas, sex queens, what could he expect? What kind of a home could a man expect to have? If he marries a girl that ain't got enough moral about her to stay home and take care of a house and wants to work out in somebody's office, what kind of a housekeeper will she be? You'll have babysitters and everything else. It's true. Now, I'm not much of this modernistic taste of women working. When I've seen these women with these uniforms on, riding around in this city on motorcycles as police, it's a disgrace to any city that'll let a woman do that. As many men that's without work. It shows the modern thinking of our city. It shows the degrading. We don't have to have them women out there like that. They ain't got no business out there like that. When God gave a man a wife, He gave him the best thing He could give him outside of salvation. But when one goes to trying to take a man's place, then she's about the worst thing that he could get a hold of. Now that's right. If a man marries a sex queen, you see what he's looking for the future. If a man marries a woman that won't stay home, you see what he's looking for in the future. And one time, this sounds awful, and I just feel to say it, and I usually, if I feel to say the thing, I ought to say it, and it's usually God's way. I used to go with a rancher that I worked with to buy cattle. And I noticed the old fellow always looking right in the face of a heifer before he went to bidding. Then he turned her head and looked back and forth. I followed him along and watched him, and he looked her up and down, and if she looked all right, the statue, then he turned her and looked her in the face, and sometimes he'd shake his head and walk away. I said, "Jeff, I want to ask you something." He said, "Say on, Bill." And I said, "Why do you always look that cow in the face?" I said, "She looks all right, a good heavy cow." He said, "I want to tell you, boy, you got a lot to learn." And I realized it after he told me. He said, "I don't care how she's made up. She might be beef plumb to the hoof. But if she's got that wild stare in her face, Don't you never buy her. I said, why so, Jeff? Well, said, the first thing is, said, she'll never stay put. And he said, the next thing is, she'll never be a mammy to her calf. And said, they put her in a pen now, the reason she's fat, you turn her loose of that wild stare, she'd run herself to death. I said, you know, I kind of learned something. I believe that applies to women, too. That wild, starey, Ricketta look, better stay away from her, boy. All that blue stuff over top her eyes. I wouldn't want that. I don't think that's becoming to a Christian. I don't care how much the television and paper says it's pretty. It's the most horrible-looking, hideous sight that I ever seen in my life. When I first seen that here Clifton's cafeteria one morning at a breakfast, I seen some of them young ladies come up, Brother Arganbright, had just come in, and he went downstairs, and I looked, and that girl come in, and I thought, well, I don't know, I never seen it before. It was some kind of, it looked like she was cankered, you know, just kind of a funny looking. I'm not saying that to be funny. I'm saying that, you know, I've seen leprosy. I'm a missionary. I've seen all kinds of freaks, you know, of how diseases. And I was going to walk up to the young lady and tell her I'm a minister. I pray for the sick. Would you like for me to pray for you? And I've never seen anything like that. And then here come 2 or 3 more, and I kind of stepped back then and waited. And Brother Arganbright come out. I said, Brother Arganbright, he may be here. I said, what's the matter with that woman? See? And he said, that's Pete. I said, well, my. I thought they ought to have her in a pest house somewhere, you know, keep it from breaking out all over other women. But, you know, you have to plan, look, pray when you're choosing. For we see by this, the word of promise, she, the bride that a man would choose, is going to reflect his character. It reflects what's in him. Now, could you imagine a man filled with the Holy Ghost take something like that to be a wife? I just don't see it, brother. Maybe I'm just an old crank, but, you know, I just can't understand that, see. Notice, for it's going to reflect what's in him. She's going to help him make his future home. I've married many couples, but it always reminds me of Christ and His bride. One of the weddings that I performed here some time ago, it was quite an outstanding thing in my life. It's been several years ago when I was just a young minister. My brother was working on the PWA. I don't know whether anybody ever remembers that yet or not. Anybody as old as me. And that was a project that the government had. And my brother worked up about 30 miles. They were digging out some lakes, a project for the conservation. And there was a boy who worked up there with him from Indianapolis, about 100 miles above Jeffersonville, where I live. And there was, he said to my brother one day, he said, Doc, he said, I'm going to get married if I just had enough money to pay the preacher. He said, I got enough money to get my license, but said I haven't got enough money to pay the preacher. Doc said, well, my brother's a preacher, and he may marry you. He said he never charges people for things like that. He said, well, you asked him if he'll marry me. Well, that night, my brother asked me. I said, if he's never been married before, either one of them, and everything's all right. He said, well, I asked him, and I said, if it is, tell him come on down. So when Saturday come along and the boy came down, it's been a great thing for me to always look back upon this. Rainy afternoon in an old Chevrolet car with the headlights wired on with baling wire. Drove up out front. Just a while after I'd lost my wife, and I was batching 2 little rooms, and Doc was up there with me waiting for them, and a boy got out of the car, and it certainly didn't look like a groom to me, or would to anybody, I guess. Yeah, I could buy a pretty good pair of shoes for $1.50, and he had on a pair that was run over, and his trousers was real baggy, and he had on one of these old moleskin jackets. I guess some of you older people would remember. It looked like it run through a washing machine without being wrenched, and it was streaking, tied up like this, and the corner up. And a little lady got out on the side with a little, some of them little checkered look dress. I don't know. I made a mistake on calling that kind of goods one time. Gingham, I believe it's called. And it was. I said it wrong again. I always do. And I said, she got out of the car, and they come up the steps, and when they walked in, the poor little thing, I guess she just, about all she had on was a skirt, and she didn't have no shoes hardly on. She'd hitchhiked from Indianapolis down, had a little hair hanging down back and long, kind of a plaits down her back, looked very young, and I said to her, "Are you old enough to get married?" She said, "Yes, sir." And she said, "I have my written permission from my father and mother." She said, "I had to show it to the court here to get my license." I said, "All right." I said, "I'd like to talk to you a little bit before we perform this wedding." They sat down. The boy kept looking around the room. He needed a haircut real bad. He kept looking around the room. He wasn't listening to me. I said, "Son, I want you to listen to what I'm saying." He said, "Yes, sir." And I said, "Do you love this girl?" He said, "Yes, sir, I do." I said, "You love him?" "Yes, sir, I do." I said, "Now, have you got a place to take her after you marry?" He said, "Yes, sir." And I said, "All right." Now I said, "I want to ask you something. I understand you're working up here on this PWA." And he said, "Yes, sir. That's about $12 a week." And I said, "You think you can make a living for her?" He said, "I'll do all I can do." And I said, "Well, that's all right." And I said, "Now, what if he gets out of it? What if he loses this job, sister? What are you going to do? Go to run back up home to Mama and Papa?" She said, "No, sir. I'm going to stay with him." And I said, "What, sir, if you have 3 or 4 children, nothing to feed them, you haven't got any work, what are you going to do, send her away?" He said, "No, sir. I'll struggle right on. We'll make it some way." I felt a little. And I seen that he really loved her, and they loved one another. I married him, and then I wondered where he'd take her. A few days I asked my brother Doc where he is. He said, "Go down to New Albany, a little city below us, and down on the river where I had some tin laying up where I went every day when I was a lineman, so when the rest of the fellows, they all sat around, told jokes and things, I'd get in the truck and run down on the river and pray during that minute, and read my Bible under a big piece of tin, where an old ironworks used to be. There's a bunch of old boxcars sitting down there, and this fellow had went down there and got one of them boxcars and sawed him a door in it, and had taken a newspaper and tacky buttons. How many knows what a tacky button is? There's no Kentuckians here then. It's take a piece of cardboard and put a thumbtack in it, a little sprig, and then push it in that's a tacky button. So they had put it all over, and he went up there to the ironworks and got him some stuff and made a step to come up and got some old boxes and had him a table. And I thought one day I'll go down and see how they're getting along. About 6 months before that, I married E.V. Knight's daughter to E.T. Slider's son. E.V. Knight, one of the richest men there is on the Ohio River. And he runs the great factories through there, making these prefab houses and so forth. And Slider, E.T. Slider, is the sand and gravel company. Millionaires' children. And I had married him, and I went back in a place, practiced it for about 2 weeks, and going back in a booth and kneeling on a pillow, and all the pomp and everything I ever went through nearly had to go through to marry that couple. And when they come out, while they would, this other little couple just stood there in a little old room where we had a little couch and a folding bed, but they both was married by the same ceremony. And then one day I thought I'd go down and visit this rich couple. They didn't have to work. Their fathers were millionaires. They built them a nice home. Frankly, this evening night up there on the hill, his doorknobs are 14 karat on his big palace. So, you can imagine what kind of home they live in. They didn't have to work. They had a nice Cadillac given to them every year, and just only children, and they had just everything they wanted. When I walked up one day, now how I got acquainted with them, one of their friends was a good friend of mine. We all kind of chummed together. And that's how I got acquainted when they wanted me to marry him. So, I went up to visit him. And I got outside of old Ford outside, walked up the steps, and I got up a little bit too close, and I heard them. And they were really fussing. They were jealous of one another. They'd been to a dance. She was a very pretty girl. And she was kind of one of these beauty queens. She took many prizes around there and won some cars and things for being beauty queen. And I looked at them, and one was sitting in one corner and one the other, fussing about some boy she'd danced with or some girl something. When I come up, they jumped up real quick and grabbed one another across the floor, and their hands across the floor, come walk over towards the door, said, "Why, hello there, Brother Branham. How are you getting along?" I said, "All right. How are you all getting along?" And, he said, we're very happy. Aren't we, honey? And she said, "Yes, dear." See? Now, see, you're putting on something that isn't real. Now, you can't get warm by a painted fire. Like some of these churches trying to paint Pentecost of something that happened 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. You can't get warm by a painted fire. A Pentecost is just as real today as it was then. See? The fire's still falling. It ain't a painted fire, it's a real fire. So, they've just, there they was. See, I wouldn't want to live like that. Well, I thought, just down over the cliff there and over on the river, and there's where this other couple wound up. I thought one Saturday afternoon I'd slip down there and see how they was getting along. So I'm dirty on the face and dirty overalls on, my tools on. I thought I'd slip up on them. And I slipped along like I was watching for insulators being cracked by the lightning or something. And, as I walked alongside of the telephone wire, the electric cables along the river, and the old Chevrolet was sitting out front. It was about a year later after I'd married them. And there was, the door was open, and I could hear them talking. So this sounds like a hypocrite, but I walked up close enough that I could listen, see what they're saying. Stayed there, and I just want to know for myself. I like to find out, be sure I know what I'm talking about. That's what I do about God's Word. Is it the truth or isn't it the truth? Will He keep His Word or doesn't He keep His Word? If He doesn't keep His Word, then He's not God. See? If He does keep His Word, He's God. See? And so I wanted to see how they was getting along, and I slipped along the side real easy. I heard him say, "Well, honey, I wanted to get that for you so bad." She said, "Now look, sweetheart." She said, "This dress is all right." She said, "Well, this is just fine." I said, "I appreciate that, but you see, I slipped around so I could look through the crack where the door had been shoved open there in the boxcar, and there he was sitting in there, and her on his lap, and his arm around her, and her arm around him, and he had one of these old slouch hats, and had put a little hole, mashed it down the top, and poured out his paycheck, and that he was laying it out on the table. Said so much for groceries, and so much for insurance, and so much on the car, and they couldn't make their ends meet. Come to find out, he'd seen a little dress up there in the window. He'd been looking at it for a couple of weeks. That cost $1 or something. He wanted to get it. He said, "Well, honey, it looks so pretty in it." And she said, "But honey, I got a dress. I don't really need it." See? And that little queen. And I backed off and looked back. I could see the steeple on top of the other house. And I stood there and looked a few minutes. I thought, who is the rich man? I thought, if Bill Branham, if you want to take which place, where would you go? For me, I'd take not the that pretty thing up on top of the hill, but I'd take this character down here as a real homemaker. Somebody that loved me and stayed with me. Somebody tried to make a home and not bleeding for everything for fine reasons. Somebody that was with you, part of you. That's always stuck with me of how that was. One chose a beautiful girl, the other chose character. Now that's the only way you can choose. First, look for character. And then, if you love her, fine.